Hi, I'm Dr. Avanti Kumar Singh. In over 20 years of practicing both Western medicine and Eastern healing traditions, the most important thing that I've learned is that healing is a journey we take together. So on this podcast, I'll be demystifying Ayurveda and other integrated medicine, showing how these simple, ancient practices are the keys to unlocking a healthy modern life. We are all healing catalysts because healing starts within. It starts with you, and it starts right now. This is a Soulfire production. Episode number 51. My beautiful friends. Well, here we are back again this week for another episode of the Healing Catalyst podcast. And I have to tell you, I'm really grateful for this space and for this platform. I was reflecting this past weekend, thinking about the fact that we're now at episode number 51 and thinking about all of the incredible people that I've met and had conversations with over the past 50 episodes of this podcast, people who are leading experts in every single field of integrated medicine and integrated wellness, and all of the knowledge and wisdom that each of them has so generously shared with me and with all of you, my listeners. And I'm just so in awe that this podcast has grown in this way. I never imagined this when I first started this 2.5 years ago. And I'm so grateful to all of you, each one of you. I really wanted to tell all of you that because getting to 50 podcast episodes is a reflection of all of you, that you find this information and these conversations helpful and valuable. And that's ultimately why I'm doing this. So thank you. Thank you for listening and for sharing and for coming back each and every week to be with me here. Okay, so let's get back to today's episode. This week, we are continuing our exploration of plants as medicine and their application and uses for mental health, given that it's Mental Health Awareness Month this month. And today we're going to switch gears just a little to plants as food and the idea that food is medicine. My guest today, Dr. Drew Ramsey, is one of the leading voices in the growing field of nutritional psychiatry. He's a psychiatrist and an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University. He also founded the Brain Food Clinic in New York City, which offers treatment and consultation for depression, anxiety, and many other emotional wellness concerns. The clinic incorporates evidence-based nutrition and integrative psychiatry treatments with psychotherapy, coaching, and medication management. His team also created the first nutritional psychiatry clinician training, helping hundreds of mental health clinicians learn the evidence and clinical methods to effectively use nutrition in clinical care. Drew is also the author of 4 books. His most recent was published last year called Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety: Nourish Your Way to Better Mental Health in 6 Weeks. Dr. Ramsey has also delivered 3 recent TEDx talks, and his work has been featured by The Today Show, CBS Sunday Morning, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Lancet Psychiatry, and NPR. Overall, he's just an amazing guy. In our conversation, Drew and I talk about the field of nutritional psychiatry and what it is, and what brought him to the field. We also discuss the other most important factors, in addition to food, that affect mental health. And we dive into the science and mechanisms of how food actually impacts our brain health, which in turn affects our mental health. We also discuss the idea of traditional dietary patterns, which is something I'm so interested in, the nutrients of the 8 power player foods, and his 3 tips for getting started with nutrition to support the brain and mental health. This was the first time I met Drew, and I have to tell you, not only is he an expert in his field in nutritional psychiatry, he is a deeply compassionate and thoughtful human being. And my conversation with him was food for my soul. I think you'll experience the same. I'm honored to share this conversation with you with Dr. Drew Ramsey about nutritional psychiatry and using plants and food as medicine. Well, Drew, it's so nice to meet you finally in person, kind of virtually. I have been following your work for a while, and I have a real interest in nutritional psychiatry. So thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to do this with me.
It's my treat, Avanti. It's really nice to be here with you and with everybody who's listening. Thanks. And thanks for those kind words. It's really, I'm one of those middle-aged people. That's always a little, I don't know, still surprising to hear to me. Like, I feel like we're both docs out there in the world trying to do good, but I'm really glad that some of the ideas have resonated with you, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. So, I like to start with a little bit about you because I find that for a lot of my listeners, they love hearing about our journeys as health professionals and sort of, what got us to where we are or what we're practicing. So you're board certified psychiatrist. How did you choose psychiatry of all the specialties, or what led you there?
Well, I mean, there are a few influences. I like the combination of science and also creative artistic stuff. And then some of my most influential family members, my aunt Marcia was a psychiatrist or psychotherapist and psychoanalyst. And so, I had some influence. And then in medical school, my own mental health, I don't know, I just sort of was not doing, I mean, I was just struggling with some depression, I had a healthy dose of existential angst. I got really kind of upset by how conventional medicine took care of people in a certain way and objectified people. And as I came into that and was, what happens is you become a doctor. In some ways, losing some aspects of human sensitivity to really do your job well, also accentuating other aspects of human sensitivity to be with people in states that, humans rarely are. So psychiatry appealed to me, and specifically psychotherapy. With this, I really just got excited about the notion that structured conversations and relationships could be therapeutic, and what that meant and how people do that and what the various types of therapy are was all very interesting to me. And then I was also at that point, so in college, I was an athlete. I ran track and played basketball, and I was a low-fat vegetarian. I was really like interested as a pre-med. I was like that annoying guy. Like I was like vegetarian and, like anti-cholesterol.
I was that annoying girl in med school too. So.
Okay, good. It's nice to, we would have gotten along great. Be like, pass me your tofu sandwich. Like, of course. Like, you going to the co-op later? Like, of course. These ideas around nutrition as being really interesting in my personal life and then not being in my professional life really didn't occur to me until then. I was really fortunate to, after medical school, I was at Indiana University, which is America's largest medical school. So I'm a very proud graduate, especially I was born and raised in Indiana. So, but coming out of there, going to New York at Columbia, really very different than where I was from, and specifically how people think about mental health. I mean, coming from rural Indiana, where there really are there are very few mental health resources. There isn't kind of what we call psychodynamic model of thinking, of really thinking about motivation and unconscious motivation. So I finished residency in 2004. I started in community psychiatry. I'm eventually helping run the largest community mental health day program, or one of them in Northern Manhattan, and one of Columbia's larger programs for the severely mentally ill. I'm part of this great clinical team at what's called the Washington Heights Community Service that takes care of Northern Manhattan. It's a primarily Dominican population. And a new set of medications had come out. So most people in this clinic had pretty challenging mental illnesses like schizophrenia, severe bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, depression with psychotic features. So a lot of patients were then getting still are getting second generation antipsychotics, which were meds that they just launched. And the real hope was people would have better resolution of symptoms with fewer side effects. And the challenge was, it was a little hard to tell at the beginning. People did seem to do a little better. The side effects seemed a little better, but then everyone seemed to get, or a lot of people, a lot of weight gain, a lot of dyslipidemia, high blood pressure. And so that led to really we were feeding patients lunch every day and looking at what we were feeding patients a little bit. I was like, if everybody's getting prediabetes, we got to start talking about nutrition. This idea that food's not a part of that conversation. That when I've been very well trained to talk to patients, there aren't usually questions about food, nutrition, food security, food skills, food preferences, food culture, all the stuff that then when I started, I don't know, kind of asking about it because I felt I should, and as I was curious about food, I hear all this mental health stuff. Right? You hear about people who like, oh, I come home from school and mom would always make me a snack. She'd be there. We'd sit, we'd talk. It was like really explain something about, or vice versa. I'd come home and the fridge would be empty. Mm-hmm. And, I learned I'd have to take my friend's lunch because if not, I wasn't going to get to eat anything because my parents worked the night shift or, whatever mm-hmm. incredibly rich stories people would have about their own personal narrative as an eater. And so that's where it felt like, it's this merger of my interest in the deeply personal parts of ourselves and our development and how that goes really well and not well for all of us. And in this interest, again, this growing field, growing set of knowledge around how food affects mental health and brain health.
Yeah, it's so interesting as you're saying this, because I feel a lot of similarities in my own story of, getting to my training in emergency medicine and feeling like, okay, who am I really helping? What's going on here? And then also suffering from a lot of sickness myself during that time, taking a look at myself and the way that I was brought up. So when you're talking about these rich stories that you were getting from patients in this community health center, it's probably, if I was one of your patients, I would have told you similar stories of.
Tell us a little bit of that. I'd love to hear a little bit about.
But growing up in a South Asian family, first generation, my parents immigrated from India, and Ayurveda, that way of living was just the way we did things, right? And realizing that when I was in my training, that everything I was doing was completely the opposite of what I had grown up with. And no wonder I was suffering from all these symptoms, right? And so it was those connections that I started to make about, the routines that we have every day affect our health. The fact that we live completely out of sync with the circadian rhythms of nature. Oh yeah, that affects our health. The food we eat affects our health, our relationships, right? It's all of these different aspects of life that have a deep impact on our health. And so I really identify with some of what you're saying in that sort of, coming to terms with the profession that you've chosen, what you're hearing from patients, what you're going through in your own self, and then putting the pieces together of like, wait a second, we're missing something here, right? And it sounds like food, that connection between food and mental health was a big one for you, obviously.
When I was really beginning to do some of the first, for me, nutritional psychiatry work, it wasn't really called, we didn't have a word for it then. It was just I called it the brain food prescription, where I'd ask people what they eat, and then I'd think about some recommendations. And it was a little strange to start recommending things. I don't have a huge background in nutrition, but you'd hear, people don't have any beans or legumes in their diet, or they don't have any leafy greens. And you'd ask about it, and here they like it. And so then they'd say, well, what should I do? Or what should I, is that important? And I don't know, I really wanted to find the answers to those questions as much as I could in the data, and then begin a conversation with my colleagues in psychiatry around this. I started in 2014 presenting at the American Psychiatric Association with a number of colleagues over the years, just we'll call it food in the brain usually, where we would talk about the evidence around mental health and nutrition. Really trying to be responsible every time I speak about this. It's not the only thing that we need to do for our mental health. I mean, sure, there's miracle cures. If you're, someone who has gone totally plant-based, didn't get any of the memos about B12, and are B12 deficient and start eating clams, yes, your mental health will be revolutionized by those clammies for sure, because they're the top source nutritionally of B12. But, while it's not the only thing we need to do for our mental health, it's certainly something that every one of us needs to get right and to get a little better, in the sense that none of our nutritional advice to date has ever revolved around the most important aspect of our health, which is our mental health. Now, there is no health without mental health. There is no having heart health or gut health or endocrine health if you don't have mental health. So you just can't, that's none of us function as well when our mental health is challenged. And so that's where beginning to try and answer some of those questions has led to the antidepressant food scale. It's led to our clinical training in nutritional psychiatry. It's led to these books like Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety and Eat Complete, where, in some ways, if you look at them, you can see I'm trying to answer these questions for both the reader and for myself. I kept getting asked, like, what are important nutrients? And realizing everybody was going to supplements when you do it that way.
Right.
I wanted to come up with, well, what foods have the most of those? Like, I don't want you to take folic acid.
Right.
I mean, you can, that's up to you, but like, why not eat lentils? You get all your folic acid. And, if you're worried you're not getting enough, you can eat lentils with an asparagus salad, and you've just consumed 2 top sources of folate and 1 top source of tryptophan. So figuring out what those foods were, figuring out a lot of people love them.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like a lot of other diets where people are like, oh, like I can't eat whatever, I can't eat my steak. I can't eat my dairy. I can't eat my, I can't eat anything with olive oil on it or nuts because they have fats and all these kind of like really unhappy eaters, and kind of looked at the way I was eating, the foods that we were beginning to recommend in the clinic, and just this, I don't know, kind of growing excitement I had of like, wow, we can make psychiatry and mental health really delicious. We can have it be a part of the conversation. It's also a way. So food is similar in a way that we're sitting in the same food web. We're with our patients often. We're sitting often with the same set of challenges. How do you, it's great to talk about all these great brain foods. How do you feed them to your kids on a Wednesday night? How do you do that on a budget? How do you do it with somebody that has a restricted palate or food allergies or just food preferences? Your kid's going through a vegan phase.
Right.
How do you support that? Should you, and have a conversation around that and what foods are important. So that's
I think it's really interesting that you brought that up because it is this very intensely personal and deep shared experience. Because food is something we all eat, we all experience it. And the data is the data of how it affects our brains, right?
That helps me, I think, be in nutritional psychiatry where the evidence is emerging.
Right.
I've been talking about fermented foods for a while. Man, the really great data about that is just coming out now and really yet to come. There is a brand new first ever nutritional psychiatry just came out. And what's exciting is they show, one, in a mental health setting, we can help people change their nutritional and dietary pattern. 2, when we do that, people have much better outcomes, statistically significantly better outcomes than individuals who, get something like, I don't know, if you get a cooking group instead of like a social group, you're just much less depressed at 6 months.
Right. That's interesting.
It's really striking data. If you get 7 nutritional counseling sessions in the middle of your depression, you're a third more likely to go into remission, full remission.
Wow. Okay. So let's get into that for a second. So I have a question. So, and this is a lot for the listeners too. What are some of the mechanisms of how having these nutrients, which we'll get to, because I know you have a list of nutrients that are really, really good for your brain and for your brain health. What are some of the mechanisms of how these nutrients influence our brain health to then influence, the mental health challenges that we might face, whether it's depression or anxiety or any of the other, diagnoses that you might make. So let's just back up for a second and talk about, because, saying for us to sit here and say, yes, food is really important, but why, right? What does it actually do?
I think there are probably about 9 mechanisms by which we've tried to describe how food influences mental health. And I've got some videos up on this because it's important for us to broaden our scope from omega-3 is a miracle brain molecule and everyone should take fish oil to thinking broadly about how food affects our mental health. So one of the ways is nutrient insufficiency. There are a lot of nutrients very important for mood. For example, if a population doesn't eat enough zinc or doesn't eat enough iron, that population is going to have a higher risk of depression. There'll be more depression among people who don't get a lot of zinc or iron. So another mechanism is around neuroplasticity, this new idea that we can help coax and promote brain repair, the birth of new brain cells, brains reaching out and making new connection. And really this revolves around this molecule BDNF, really interesting molecule in terms of what it does in our brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it's a protein our DNA codes for that tells our brain cells to do good stuff, to stay alive, to make more connections. Inflammation, regulation of inflammation is another way that food influences mental health. Kind of new data, but we think at least research says like maybe a third, 40% of patients who have depression are also struggling with some amount of inflammation being involved. We also know that when people get depressed, all their inflammatory factors go up. So, there's still, researchers are still really untangling, what's causal and what's correlational. We know that like if you don't eat enough B12 or B9, that will cause depression definitively. But there are a lot of other things that are correlated with depression that we don't know whether it causes it or just, people, let's say, start craving a lot of carbs and sweets because they're depressed, right?
Right.
It's not that it causes it. But anyway, just quickly, some other mechanisms. We're learning a lot about inflammation in the microbiome. So fermented foods and plants affect the microbiome. It looks like more fermented foods particularly is involved in the microbiome kind of better regulating the immune system. Used to sound like crazy juju wellness stuff. Now that's just like science.
Right.
It's really crazy. I think there's a connection piece and Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. My most recent book, I have a 6-week plan, and the last week isn't about food. It's about connecting with your food community, connecting with people in your life around food, about forming more connections with you, your food supply, and your food community. So I think that's a big part of it. That when we go out to, the other night, I finished work and my wife called and said, "Hey, we're meeting this other family." And we all went out to pizza. And, I just like was the banter, the fun, right. So those are the kind of things that, again, that's great for my mental health. Right. I could have stayed home and eaten some wild salmon. Pizza's not the best brain food, but like which one's better for my mental health? The pizza was in that situation. The full on gluten, cheese, sausage, because I'm in this non-isolated internet. There was also a delicious salad and some great kombucha. So don't worry, I got some brain foods in there, but just as an example so connections, I think there's a food SIBO effect, as I call it, which is that when I establish a set of food rules and Avanti follows them, there's a lot of psychology involved in Avanti feeling great. All of us on some level like to perform. And if there's someone we decide someone's our food guru and they say, I really think this is awful, this is bad, whatever it is. And we do that and we feel a little better, because a lot of times these interventions revolve around, cutting out processed foods. When you cut out gluten for people, you cut out commercial baked goods. Yep. When you cut out commercial baked goods, you just reduce somebody's risk of depression.
Exactly.
Period.
Yes. Period.
Because they're highly correlated with depression. So it's so food SIBO effects, I think, are real, and I think they're welcome. I like the idea that we feel good when we make choices according to a set of values that we believe are going to help our health. We can never know. I was talking to a gentleman who's fighting end-stage cancer. He's now cancer-free. He's done an amazing job. But, he said, like, I did all this healthy stuff. I eat vegetables every day. I still got cancer. It's not perfect science, right? So again, to say that idea that we're doing according to our values, what we best discern is good according to the science in terms of promoting our health.
And I think one thing, sorry to interrupt you, I think what you're bringing up is a really important point, is that, you're specifically in nutritional psychiatry, but nutrition is not just about the food. It's about the connection. It's about these other things that are feeding you, right? And that's exactly, I feel like that's what you're saying. And I know from an Ayurvedic lens, that is so much what I talk about, that all of these aspects of life influence our health, our, ability to either go down that path to illness or that path to health. And connection, relationships are one of those things. So,
and for you, culture, right? I'd be really interested to hear, Avanti, a little about your experience as an eater, because I think so many eaters are in this either mixed culture from a mix of cultures, and so defining it for themselves is a little challenging, or have been displaced from their culture for whatever reasons. Some good, some not, right? And I'm wondering for you the kind of connection between the traditional foods of your family and your mental health.
It's a really good point. I grew up eating mostly Indian food, home cooked Indian food that my mom would make. My mom was a homemaker. And, of course, it's not a coincidence that for the first 18 years of my life, when I was living at home, I had no mental health challenges. Now, of course, a lot of my struggles with depression and even anxiety started when I was in my medical training, which, we can get on. That's a whole nother reason that
that's like baseline. I mean,
that's baseline. Yeah, exactly.
Really,
but it also correlates with me not eating a lot of those traditional foods that I grew up with, right? And adopting a very Western diet that didn't have a lot of those spices and those anti-inflammatory.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you do the opposite of the studies, right? All of the studies are, we're going to take people on a crappy Western diet and we're going to put them on a traditional diet. You go from eating this traditional diet, literally we'd all prescribe for mental health. Yeah. And to this like Western diet.
Right. And it correlates exactly with my, as soon as the depression and anxiety started to show up for me as a young adult, a new mom, newly married, all of those things had an impact, but definitely there is a connection there. And, it's actually interesting because I was reading your work and you have this concept of traditional dietary patterns, which I find really fascinating for this exact reason. Can you tell us more about sort of what you mean by that, the traditional dietary patterns?
When I speak to the public, I show a slide. It's on the back porch in New York City. We had this little cute, tiny apartment when we first started having kids, and my daughter's sitting on my lap, and we're eating. We got like a big bowl of mussels with the broth in it, and we're like eating out of it together. And I kind of say, look, I apologize that we're going to be talking a lot about nutrients, but it's a shame to reduce this lovely scene, this young doctor and his daughter having all the good bonding stuff going on, that the only value of these mussels is that they have lots of B12 and lots of DHA. And so and for a lot of times medicine, for, lots of good reasons, has been kind of obsessed with that. We want to know, like, if you have low B12, what happens to your risk of dementia? But usually people don't just have low B12, right? That comes from someplace. Mm-hmm. Their gut is disrupted. They have a little autoimmune illness. They are not eating a set of few foods that have B12. So, the dietary pattern allows us to think more broadly about our foods. One, so we're not obsessed with like one superfood. The two, that we're not just obsessed with one way of thinking about food. What traditional dietary pattern mean is that the stuff that's on your plate is not highly processed food. It's food that existed in 1900. It's food that existed in 1800. It's food that existed 3,000 years ago. Right. Some people like to break this up. The Paleolithic people try to say like agriculture was evil, grains are evil, beans are evil. I mean, I think there's just a lot of data that goes against all of that. Do I think people have challenges with a lot of different foods? Sure. Is it important for all of us to experiment and kind of mix it up? And especially if we're having challenges, entertain ideas around food sensitivities or food categories that our body just doesn't like at this point in our life? Sure. That's all important. But dietary patterns. So in nutritional psychiatry and as a clinician, what I really focus on in a dietary pattern is increasing nutrient density.
Okay.
I'm going to look at it realistically as, let's say you're, 2,000, 2,500 calories a day, right? For those calories, I'm wondering, how many omega-3 fats can I get into that brain? Can I, top out all of the most important nutrients for depression, 100%, 150%? Can I get enough magnesium and zinc and potassium for that number of calories? And can I avoid foods that are, besides the nutrition, maybe going to counteract my efforts? Can I avoid foods that are going to promote weight gain and diabetes? Can I avoid foods that are going to promote depression and anxiety? And so as we're thinking about a dietary pattern, thinking that all the data says it's a traditional dietary pattern. So these are going to be whole foods we're picking. Our antidepressant food scale is an open source paper that Laura LaChance, a fellow psychiatrist and colleague, published that anybody can look up, where we basically asked, what are the most important nutrients for depression? We found 12. That's always going to evolve and change. And there were some, it's like, they're in all my books and all my talks, and I believe in the science, but it didn't make this list. Like there aren't fermented foods on this list because you can't really calculate that exactly. There aren't phytonutrients aren't considered in this list, but these 12 traditional nutrients things, not the usual suspects, some surprising: potassium, selenium, B6, but the usual suspect: omega-3 fats, iron, zinc, magnesium, B12, B9, B1. We just ask, what whole natural foods have the most of these per calorie? Mm-hmm. We create this list of antidepressant foods, the both plant and animal foods, with the idea, number one on the plant list is watercress. It's not like, oh, that's why you're depressed, you haven't been eating watercress. It's more, this list helped us see food categories. That watercress is on there. So is a bunch of other leafy greens. Mm-hmm. And leafy greens are on there because leafy greens are mostly water. They've got a lot of nutrition, lots of different nutrients, lots of vitamin C, lots of folate, some fiber, bunch of interesting phytonutrients. And there's almost no calories, right? 20, right. 30, 40 calories a cup. So, and there are also lots of rainbow, colorful vegetables, peppers, and cruciferous vegetables on this list. On the animal side, it was fish, seafood, mm-hmm. bivalves in particular. 3 of the top 5 were mussels, clams, and oysters. Oysters were the top food for animals. And again, that's because these are very nutrient-dense foods. One oyster, an East Coast oyster, has 10 calories, mm-hmm. And is almost has 100% of your daily need of zinc. Mm-hmm. Just one. For 10 calories. To note, 42% of Americans don't meet the recommended daily allowance for zinc. So is oyster the answer for everybody? A lot of people don't know how to eat oysters or don't like oysters, right. or aren't near. But that said, it's never been a food that's been promoted or recommended or encouraged based on the fact that it has all of these nutrients that our brain needs. And that for the most part, human brains have always eaten these foods. So, but that's a long-winded explanation to dietary pattern. There's a lot of different ways right now that there's like a dietary pattern. It's like there's a vegan dietary pattern or there's a carnivore dietary pattern. You better pick one soon, folks, because mm-hmm. It's become so, I guess, mostly sad to me that the nuance of nutrition, personal nutrition, the nuance of animals within our ecosystem, food system, the way that there are multiple different roles that those play for us, right, and multiple different ethical challenges for us besides, some of maybe the obvious ones. That are certainly the way we do meat now for a lot right. of folks is not a win.
Yeah,
but it's just sad to me that instead of focusing on mental health, instead of focusing on food security, instead of focusing on the deep connections that food can provide us, mm-hmm. it's become this really polarizing thing. Right. Filled with a lot of gosh, there's so much information, Avanti. Can you believe how much? Have you seen some misinformation about kale? I mean, you're a doctor, like literally kale. If you Google low oxalate diet, kale is like top of, like you will be put on kale. People are like, what leafy green can I get that doesn't have oxalates? It's like kale or bok choy, but kale. So the idea that, somehow the internet's full of all this stuff that like kale's filled with the anti-nutrients that sucks all the nutrition out of it. I mean, it's really,
right.
I think it just goes to show you some people don't realize how confused folks are and how important it is whenever someone has a platform to be really responsible when we think about recommendations when it comes to human health. But anyway.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think, you're getting to a point that I really talk a lot about with, my students and my clients and, people that I teach, which is, everything is good. Not everything is good for everyone. And mm-hmm. that, there is no one set way to eat, and it is very personalized, but there are some general things that we can all follow, which is, I think, what you're getting at with this traditional dietary pattern, which is to go back to the way that our grandmothers and great grandmothers and grandfathers ate, which is, as balanced as they could with a lot of whole foods that came from the earth that were not processed, and doing a variety of foods, right? I mean, that's what I'm hearing. And also depending culturally, right? I'm South Asian. I came from a family that was vegetarian religiously. And so we didn't eat a lot of, there was no animal protein. There was no animal sources of these nutrients. And that's what I grew up with, right? But that doesn't mean that that should be the way it is for everyone. And if I am, facing a health challenge like depression, it's a good idea for me to try some fish, which I have, and it's helped me immensely.
Share with everybody, because maybe I'm a little, I don't know, different about this clinically, but I think it's important. It's very intentional that if I were working with Avanti and I heard that, I'd really first want to hear about the meaning of a vegetarian diet to her, how it fits into her culture. I think so often physicians hear this and they think, oh, you're a woman, you're vegetarian, you're not getting enough iron, you have depression, you're not getting omega-3 fats, you should be eating wild salmon. Why aren't you eating salmon? Yep. And it's like, it's a way that bias enters in all kinds of ways in medicine. That's really unfortunate when it comes to nutrition. There are lots of ways for Avanti to eat a perfectly a vegetarian diet that's in line, especially with her religious beliefs, and not eat seafood. Right. And if she wants to make that choice to try, I'm always really honored to be a clinician who's in that space with somebody with maybe it's going to be disgusting. Maybe she's going to go fall in love with sushi and eating fish eggs all the time. Who knows? But, being in someone's corner to help them sort that out is really one of the, first of all, stances, I think, of nutritional psychiatry that I really try to promote.
I really appreciate that, because that's exactly pretty much what happened to me with the integrative psychiatrist that I worked with, here in Chicago, who's a friend of mine now. And he kind of said the same thing to me that, Avanti, I get it. You're a vegetarian and this is what the data shows. And I do think that this will help you. And so with that kind of dialogue with the clinician who really cares and is really hearing me, right? Because doctors need doctors too, right? I was willing to make that change. And I do feel that it has helped me, and I think it gets back to this idea that, people will say to me, Ayurveda, well, it's very much a vegetarian way of life. Well, okay, it was written that way in the Vedic texts and perhaps assumed because of cultural and religious influences, but it's not exactly ever said that it has to be vegetarian. And so you can be non-vegetarian and follow an Ayurvedic lifestyle. And so I think this is sort of what you're getting at, is that you really have to meet people where they are to help them, and becoming positional about things and saying, no, you must have clams and oysters and this and that because you have depression and you want to get over depression. Well, but there are other ways, to do that. But, what would you say are some of the key nutrients for someone who's dealing with depression or anxiety, whichever you want to talk about, or we can talk about both. What would you say are some of the key nutrients or foods that people can try to add to their diets to help them with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'd like to answer on the food with the foods, because, the nutrients, they're all important for mental health. Certainly the 12 Dr. Lachance and I found that we mentioned earlier, those are right now in the literature the most important. But lots of nutrients like iodine, hugely important for mental health. It's one of that is the top worldwide cause, iodine deficiency, of sort of delays in mental and brain development. So the foods that we came to, our power players, as I called them, are representations of these food categories. My power players, though, just to kind of go through them, red beans for the beans. Lots of people like black beans. I love black beans, but red beans are one of the top antioxidant containing food. Actually, it is the top according to the USDA. I like beans for a lot of different reasons, but mainly fiber, protein. Fermented foods is a big food category. Kefir and kombucha are kind of two of the big ones that I find most accessible. Kefir in part because it has the most nutrients, most colony forming units of bacteria compared to other fermented foods, and compared to probiotics for sure. Like some kefirs I've seen 6 to 8 ounces with colony forming units of 1 trillion. And you go look at your probiotics in your grocery store. They go to like 2 billion.
Yeah.
It's like 500 times less. So some of the other foods in the leafy green category, besides I have a pretty serious kale obsession for a while after my second book was 50 Shades of Kale.
I mean, you did write a book on it.
Yeah,
so with that title,
it's like a strange career move, right? It's like, and then launch.
It's a great title, by the way. I love
it.
50 Shades of Kale.
I like that. It's like
awesome.
Thank you. It's just, I think that I really enjoyed that book. I wrote that Jennifer Eastelow was my chef and co-author on that book. And we had a wild time and we ate a lot of kale. I think at one point for like 3 years in a row, like I'd eaten kale every day, and literally everywhere I went, people made me a kale salad. I mean, I ate every type of kale salad you can imagine. It's pretty, and I still eat kale salads. It's not like, again, this idea that like kale is toxic.
Right.
It's like, I don't take any supplements, and I'm not trying to make it about aging, but like, if kale were a toxic food, I would be somebody who would probably be having a lot of effects of that as a top promoter of kale.
Yeah.
So anyway, leafy greens. I'm a big fan. If I'm doing some meal and I'm like here I am serving up pasta, I'd drop a couple microgreens on there. Just again, does that make pasta like an incredible health food? No. Does it add a ton of nutrition to my pasta meal? Yes, it does. And so leafy greens are a great food category, and those are some that I recommend. In terms of seafood, I kind of think about the trifecta. I mean, there's the bivalves, the mussels, clams, and oysters trifecta, where anything from pasta vongole to interesting, bula-based, just dishes that maybe aren't just one of those things. If it's a challenge for you, or I always encourage people, if it's something you're not used to, try it in a restaurant, or when someone else orders it, pick one of their mussels off their plate and try it out. You don't have to go, make 2 pounds and then throw it away.
Yeah.
Be kind to yourself as you try things out. But besides the wild salmon, known for its incredible omega-3 content, I also promote canned fish, just because of the ease of using it, and sardines and anchovies, just because the low price point, very young animals, so don't have to worry about as much, mercury, toxins, plastics, all that stuff. And they last forever. You don't have to worry whether it's fresh or not. For things like the salmon, and they're already cooked. So, kind of for a lot of the barriers, it's just that most people, I didn't know how to use anchovies. I didn't, I make a great kale Caesar salad now. It's awesome. And I make an amazing, gnocchi with, I'm in a pasta mood. It's like getting to be the end of the week here, but a gnocchi with like sardines and, kind of a bunch of pine nuts and garlic and a little tomato paste. So it's figuring out your canned fish game. That's definitely on my list. Okay. Dark chocolate is on there. We've talked about dark chocolate, but dark chocolate's interesting, very stimulating food for a lot of people. Especially if you get about an 80% plus, this is not something you're going to wolf down. Very intense culinary experience, very, very rich. A lot of phytonutrients, so plant-based nutrients in cacao, lots of flavanols, some interesting data that your blood flow to your brain increases, the risk of depression goes down. So again, our hope in nutritional psychiatry is not to get people eating dark chocolate all the time, but if people are enjoying dark chocolate and you have a square for breakfast or 2, or, in the middle of your day when you're slumpy, it's fine to have a dark chocolate bar. It's not this horrible, guilty, awful, right? It's actually just another brain food.
Right.
And so, very, very often for me, a snack is going to be a handful of raw, unsalted nuts and some dark chocolate. So I'm trying to think of other food categories. Rainbow vegetables, call them brainbows. This idea that a lot of different natural colors on your plate is just a really, it's a nice, basic, easy metric around the number of phytonutrients that you're eating, because phytonutrients generally are represented in plants and as pigments. So a lot of these carotenoids and flavanols are associated with blue and orange and yellow and red foods. So it's also beautiful. In terms of meat and eggs, again, I think these are very nutrient dense foods for the most part. If you look at, the outrage about meat, it's not on a caloric basis. People are really mistaken that most of the calories and things like a burger don't come from the burger. If you get a fast food burger, the majority of those calories are not from beef.
Right.
even, if you look at, I don't know, a good 4-6 ounce steak, we're talking a couple hundred calories. It's not a big caloric load, and it's a lot of nutrition and highly absorbable nutrition. I encourage people to be much more mindful with their meat. That I find there's a lot of burgers and T-bones and filet mignons, and not a lot of beef stews, not a lot of, taco with liver meat in there, not a lot of beef shanks. Let's talk about the action items from this. I hope those power players help a little bit. There's a lot more information about those and some of the bigger concepts in nutritional psychiatry, which we've touched on, the microbiome, inflammation. The book has lots and lots of illustrations.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Really beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Katrin Kristen is the illustrator. She was our first book. Really wonderful to work with her. But then, along with all the delicious foods we've talked about, and some that, I suspect a lot of people like and maybe haven't thought about, or, I don't think anybody said, hey, cashews are a great brain food because they're filled with iron, and think about your seafood game. So I hope that isn't oppressive and annoying, but comes across to people as
I think it's super helpful. And I know that we're really over time, but I have 2 more questions if you could indulge me.
Ahead. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, I think one question that I know a lot of people will ask, well, okay, I make all these changes. How long will it take for me to start feeling different? What have you seen clinically with the hundreds and thousands of patients that you've seen and worked with?
I'm in the thousands, I think.
Thousands, I'm sure you are.
Thousands of hours. I calculated the day. I'm like over 20,000 hours in the chair as a therapist. So I feel good about that number, but I think it's thousands of people.
Thousands of people, right? So, what have you seen clinically in your work with thousands of patients?
A few caveats about that. I'm a general psychiatrist, so people come to me for all kinds of mental health reasons, and food is one of the things I do. So I have a biased sample in the sense that a lot of people who see me end up in therapy or take medications or come, take supplements. I find that when food is something that people incorporate into their plan, a number of things happen. Because this way of eating leads to less inflammation, for some people leads to weight loss. It leads to an avoidance of processed food. There's an initial effect for people of adhering to a plan. And because it's good and delicious stuff, I think a little bump. I think anytime any of us feel like I've been seen and heard and there's a plan moving forward, especially if we're in a bad spot with our mental health, that really helps, So I don't think most people ever expect like, oh, I ate salmon and like, now I'm like, where's that good mood you promised?
Right.
Antidepressants take a month to work for a good, except for ketamine, for a good reason, which is that as you coax new brain connections to be made and you kind of squash some inflammation, as most antidepressants are also anti-inflammatories, it takes a little bit, is the theory. So I try to think about food in the same way. We're thinking about 3 to 4 weeks. That said, sometimes, like if you're starting to add in a lot of fermented food, a recent study by Wastick and Gardner out of Stanford said they ramped up people's fermented foods, did amazing things for the microbiome diversity, for their immune system to kind of function better. It was a very cool study. But they're like 3 to 4 weeks of like gas and bloating and just kind of getting used to the plants and the fermented food. So, I think the things that surprised me that I would hear people improve their food. I hear they sleep better and they have better energy. Those 2 things are of course related, which I never expected. It's like the first time I was like, how's it going with the food? They're like, oh, it's good. I'm sleeping better. And so and I think part of that is people just being more intentional, right? If you're not
right,
if you're struggling with your mental health, and if you're under my care, you'll get a lot of encouragement. Hopefully not in a judgmental way, but a lot of encouragement about an earlier bedtime. A lot of encouragement about really early morning light, improving these foods. So there's more usually going on than just the food. But I'm going to say 3 to 4 weeks. And then let's just quickly say about the studies that are impressive. So you take somebody who has extremely severe depression, you teach them a Mediterranean diet and they adopt it. Their mood improves drastically, and they still remain mildly depressed, but they go from like scoring a 25, 26 on a mood rating scale, which is severely depressed, down to, something like a 10, a mild depression.
That's incredible.
They do that over 3 months and it sustains at 6 months. Wow. The best data on this is for college students and it's 3 weeks.
Wow.
If you show college students who are a little bit depressed and have bad eating habits a video about eating for brain health, and you call them twice for 5 minutes each, and you give them a box of olive oil, nut butters, nuts, and the spices, cinnamon and turmeric, with some recipes and encouragement and handouts about eating a traditional diet. In 3 weeks, you drastically reduce their depression on formal rating scales. Drastically is like all the other kids go up by a few points and these kids go down by like 6, 7, 8 points. And it's like a 20-point scale.
That's incredible.
It's really so that, I mean, that's answering your question of how much time, a little bit of my clinical perspective and a little bit of the studies.
Let's end like our conversation here with 3 tips that if you could get, I mean, you've told us so much and shared so much knowledge and wisdom that it's hard to keep up. I'm going to have to go back and listen and make notes. But, what would be 3 tips that you would give my listeners to really, if they wanted to start using plants and food as medicine to support their mental health? What would you suggest to them?
Okay. Number 1's oven roasted vegetables. I think having a sheet pan or a cookie sheet, you drop down some parchment paper, get a bowl, whatever it is, whatever veggies you like, broccoli, red peppers, asparagus, cabbage, squash, Brussels sprouts. I think number 2 is seafood, just because that's where people struggle the most, whether that's doing something for the first time. If you're a seafood eater, like making mussels at home or shucking oysters, be careful about shucking oysters at home, or making the wild salmon burgers and eat to beat depression and anxiety. If you're not a seafood eater, I would be thinking about, are there some places that are of interest to you? Are fish tacos of interest to you? Is shrimp ceviche? So exploring, I haven't thought about ceviche, and I haven't thought about Calanese or ceviche in a really long time.
I have a feeling you're going to be making some of that this weekend.
It's like just inspired. So that's 2. Well, I'm just going to say like number 3 is number 3. I'm going to call special sprinkle. And so I think it's always important to have a special sprinkle. I'm making this up right now, Avanti.
I love it.
Special sprinkle.
It's going to be in your next book.
It's something that you can sprinkle on a lot of different foods and really bump up the nutrient density. So I have been making a lot of waffles, if you've noticed this. So, think of like, what can you special sprinkle in there? Again, to increase the nutrient density. Like, how do we drop in zinc? How do we drop in more fiber? How do we switch out some of that flour, all of it, for something like buckwheat flour? The cacao nibs go in there that I can sprinkle those in. I can chop in those pumpkin seeds. I sprinkle those in. All of a sudden, I've got a pretty nutrient dense waffle. The other thing about cacao nibs, I love to drop them in the smoothies for a little bit of texture. I love to, for folks who are oatmeal fans and looking ways to jazz up your oatmeal. Again, it's not sweet, especially if you're not a sweet person. A lot of people aren't sweet people. If you're not a sweet person, cacao nibs are where it's at. You get this really, really rich but subtle chocolate flavor. So, and then pumpkin seeds are great. They're great in smoothies. They're great in salads. I put them in omelets. Just they're packed with zinc. Pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds packed with zinc. Sunflower seeds packed with vitamin E. So those are my three little tips.
I love it. I love it. This feels like a really good place to end our time together. If I offer up the phrase to you to catalyze healing, what comes up for you?
Eat more fermented foods.
I love it.
Right now. I mean, I think that I realize some people don't like them. They don't fit for everybody. So I'm going to say that's for the people who are okay trying some fermented foods. But I think the microbiome diversity data is good. And that's the most actionable step. If you don't like fermented foods, you don't like that answer, I would say to catalyze healing, the most important thing for you to do is try to have a deeper conversation. Doesn't matter who that's with or whether it's just with yourself. I just think in my practice of psychiatry, I'm amazed at how deep into conversation and process we can get with other individuals. Even people, a lot of people don't know me very well, and suddenly we're in some of the richest parts of their mind. And so I think that's all of us have that capacity. I don't have them, I've gotten a lot of experience sitting and listening. It's valuable, right? It's like a meditation for me now to sit and be with people that way. But but we all have that capacity to deepen our listening and to then deepen our experience with other people. So I think that process, and thinking of that process, that deepening of our connections with others, deepening of our capacity for kindness and tolerance. I think that's that catalyzes healing for me, because that's actually the pinnacle of health.
And I have to say, thank you for doing that with me. I mean, the conversation we have had has been very deep and I feel very connected to you. And this is the first time I've met you, and we have gone so over our time, but thank you. And thank you for indulging me in so many questions and being so vulnerable and honest. And thank you. Thanks again for listening to The Healing Catalyst. If you love what you heard, please hit follow and pass it along to a friend. And if you're feeling really inspired, please rate and review so that others can find this podcast more easily. To learn more, head to avantikumarsingh.com. And to connect with me directly, find me on Instagram at avantikumarsingh. I'll be back next week and hope that you will be too. Until then, remember, with the right catalyst, you have the power to activate your own healing, because healing starts within.